Hey, welcome to React Roundup, the podcast where we keep you updated on all things React related. This show is produced by Top End Devs and Envoy. Top End Devs is where we create Top End Devs who get top end pay and recognition while working on interesting problems and making meaningful community contributions. And Envoy, which provides the most client-friendly model for software outsourcing. Clients can hire Envoy's designers and engineers, and they only pay after the tasks are delivered and approved. In today's episode, we will talk about an AI-powered what you see is what you get editor. Basically, like if you're familiar with Notion, if you have used Notion at all, anytime in your life, then you know that you have this very visual way of editing your content and interacting with it. And there is a library that basically allows you to have the functionalities that Notion has in their editor. And this is what we're going to be talking about in this episode. My name is Lucas Paganini, your host in the podcast. And joining me in today's episode are the also hosts, Chris Fruin.
Hello, everybody.
Peter Osa.
Hi, everyone.
And our very special guest, Colby Fayock, which is the Director of Developer Experience Engineering at Cloudinary and also a content creator.
Hey, everybody. How's it going? I'm excited to be here.
Thank you for taking the time, Colby. I'm very excited as well. I think this is an interesting topic, and I, for one, it's weird, right? When we are developers, instead of us thinking like, oh, we have this problem, so for this problem, I'm going to use this library. Sometimes we get so excited about a library that we think, how can I figure out a problem so that I can use that library? That's
Exactly.
Almost like what I'm feeling right now. I thought this was a really interesting library, so I'm eager to learn more about it.
Yeah, I'm ready to dig in.
All right. So I tried to give a very quick pitch about the library, but you have actually used it. So how would you describe it?
Yeah, so it's ultimately a React library, a component library that's intended to be able to give you, like you said, the a drop-in WYSIWYG editor that's kind of like Notion style, where you have your commands, you have where you can kind of click onto a word and edit it in line. Basically, this a similar experience that you would get inside of Notion, only you can drop it inside your own application, which is pretty compelling because editors can be vastly complicated depending on what you're trying to do, and being able to give as good of a UX as you can is critical.
Cool. All right. Let's talk a bit about also environments in which we can run it. Is this a React-specific library, or is it framework agnostic and we can use it on other frameworks as well?
Yeah, so unless they've made updates, it is React specific. But the particular example that I was playing around with was in Astro, which can use React, but it should be able to be used in any kind of React environment. Astro specifically is just an awesome tool that I've been trying to spend more and more time with. And, one of the things that's nice about it is you can use most of the popular framework or UI libraries with it. So whether it's React, Vue, Svelte, or whatever, you can use it. So that gives you an opportunity to use a tool like Novel, which is only available for React, still within the Astro environment.
Understood. Okay. Let's understand a little bit more about what can it do and what can't it do. I think we can assume that most people listening to us are at least somewhat familiar with Notion, have used it at least once in their lives. So I think we can safely assume that. From that perspective, comparing to the functionalities that the Notion editor exposes, what can we expect from this library?
Sure. And I won't say that I know one-to-one of what the feature lists are. I've used Notion, but I'm not a heavy Notion user. But generally speaking, from the basics, it's being able to use the command format in order to create an H1 tag. So what that would be is by first specifying the / key, and then you can continue typing out whatever kind of autocomplete feature that you want. So maybe I wanted to add an H1, maybe an H2. I can select that particular format, and then I'll continue writing it out as such. Or alternatively, I can write that as Markdown. So maybe I'll do the one hashtag symbol in space, and it'll turn it into an H1 for me. But similarly, there's a lot of other features in it. You can add lists. You can add images and all those YouTube embeds. It gives you a bunch of those similar commands so that you have a similar experience with a very interactive UI rich way to write your content. But one of the things that is really interesting with it, and I think Notion has this as well, is it does have the built-in AI feature, which is kind of what makes a novel itself compelling, where it has the ability to reach out to an AI service, which we can get into, to perform things like autocomplete or maybe just simply asking questions with AI.
Okay, talking specifically about the AI functionalities, how does that integration work? Because we don't have yet a very easy and straightforward, like web standard way of running AI locally. I think we're going to get there eventually, but we still don't. So I imagine that you would have to connect your keys to OpenAI, or maybe like send a request to a backend. How does that work?
Yeah, so it works with really any kind of AI service that you want. So you would make a request to the AI service through like a hook kind of capability. So once you try to write in whatever the prompt is through the slash command or through the ask AI, you essentially the route that I kind of took in my tutorial is I created an endpoint in order to take that API request, where then I crafted the prompt to whatever I wanted that to be. At that point, you can kind of customize it to your liking. I think they have some examples in there for just kind of like a standard way to that they implemented their autocomplete. But that gives you the opportunity to really kind of do whatever you want with the AI command, and then use whatever service you want. Where OpenAI is probably one of the most mainstream services to use in that regard. But given it is so open and you can create your own endpoint, you can probably use whatever service you want with it, or your own models if you want.
Gotcha. Okay. Assuming that I just want to use one of those ready-made providers, wouldn't it be a safety concern because it'd be exposing the keys in the front end, right? So I guess even in that sense, even if I were to use OpenAI, it would probably be safer if I were to add a backend endpoint so that I don't expose the API key.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. You definitely want to wrap it in some kind of API endpoint, whether that's a serverless function or maybe just have a server running that takes in those requests. But you absolutely wouldn't want to expose. API keys are something that you never want to expose. But I think increasingly with AI becoming what it is, it's probably more important than ever because they can really rack up those bills high. And I'm sure finding leaked AI API keys is really in demand right now.
Yeah, good point. When I briefly introduced the topic of AI, I mentioned that we don't yet have a way of just running AI models locally. But I'm actually not even sure what's the current status of it. Is that really still the case? Or because I know that Meta has released some very small in quotes, right? Because the
Right.
smallest Yama model, I think it's 5 gigs. So you still don't want to download it for every user, but I think
Right.
technically you could put it on a WebAssembly module and load it lazily. And then if it's not loaded yet, then you use a remote server. If it's loaded, then you use it. There could be ways, but I don't know. Like, are there, or do you know, or have you used any AI models that you can actually run them locally and they perform well?
So I haven't played around with the route that you took, which sounds really interesting. That would be fun to explore. But the one I haven't played around with any of them locally inside of the browser. But what I have seen and that I do want to play around with is Google is implementing an AI model into the browser, and I think if I'm not mistaken, I think it might be behind a feature flag in the beta version. I might be wrong with that. Don't quote me, but something along those lines. But being able to actually interact with that model through your Chrome browser is pretty compelling, and being able to have those capabilities that you can integrate into web apps is pretty awesome. So it's exciting times to see what kind of things that will be integrated like that without having to make all those server requests.
Pretty cool. Yeah. Chris, Peter, any questions?
Yeah, I do have one. I think mine is for the editor. So I wanted to ask if the editor supports like font matter like data. if it does. Maybe, for example, there may be some endpoints that require you to send the data to maybe font matter or probably even JSON, if you will. So I don't know if it supports that, the editor. Yeah.
So I don't know about front matter specifically, but I know that you can get the content, you can save the content in different formats. I can't remember if Markdown is one specifically. There might be like a plugin or something for that, but I know JSON is one of the standard formats that they provide. When I was doing it in HTML to save the HTML into a database, since in my mind that was a very flexible format to save that kind of content in. But depending on your setup, like if you're set up to use Markdown or whatever, anything should probably work in that regard. But it is pretty flexible for the different types of way. And I think there's plugins or extensions that you can find to kind of manipulate the data as you want, so that you can have the flexibility to work with the data as you need.
All right. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. I think that's the question I have. Yeah. I think okay. Maybe another should be um maybe going in a way explaining how, like, I know that the viewer may want to know how obviously I know you're using AI for the autocomplete, but then maybe a bit of more details to how you achieved that and all. Yeah, with the editor.
Yeah, sure. So the way that the component library or the library exposed it is it allowed me to create an endpoint. And I can't remember if it was a set endpoint URL that I had to create, or if I could configure that. I'm blanking on that right now. But regardless, I created a serverless function, which was in modern web frameworks is relatively straightforward. You're able to create the API route, take the incoming parameters, which is going to be the dynamic data passed in through the client, through the React client, and then essentially take that, and then you can feed it to whatever service you want. So in my case, I used OpenAI. I used the OpenAI SDK. I was able to feed the prompt that I'd crafted along with the input from the editor, and ultimately get that response and pass it back, I believe through a stream, so that you get that typing effect or whatever you want to call it inside of the client.
Yeah, that's very awesome. Yeah, that's very awesome. Yeah, kind of very intuitive. Yeah, I think that's for my question.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah. Chris, do you have any contributions here?
Yeah, just one. And Colby, I think you mentioned it very briefly. The concept of plugins is. Do you know if that is like what's their philosophy? Do they prefer like pull requests for new features, or is there like a clear interface for plugins, or how does that work?
So that's a good question, and I don't know if I have a great answer there. I know that you can add your own custom commands. That's not necessarily answering the question, but it does give the interface, and I believe it's through custom components where you create a custom commands component and then kind of set it up to your configuration for what you want to do. As far as plugins, I believe since it's on the TipTap editor, TipTap has its own kind of ecosystem. I'm not sure if Novel itself has much of its own plugin ecosystem, but that would be something that'd be interesting to look into, because there's a lot of potential there. But it makes you wonder, would it make sense for them to provide their own plugin ecosystem or kind of just piggyback off of the TipTap editor? So I'm not quite sure about that. But as far as I'm aware, I believe that they take contributions. I would hope they take contributions. I haven't tried to contribute myself. I know. So the original author was Stephen Tay, but he's passed the torch on to somebody else to maintain the library. So I'm not quite sure where it is in that state.
Cool. Yeah, very interesting. I almost wonder, like when I saw the demo, I wonder if Notion is are they using TipTap in the background? It feels like exactly the same.
Right. So, yeah, I have no idea. If I would have to guess, that they wrote their editor from more or less scratch, but that's a good question because TipTap is pretty, comprehensive, and it's a lot of work. But I'm just thinking from the perspective of a big company. Like more often than not, they have very specific needs. So I'm curious if they had to go through that pain point of figuring out, hitting the wall or hitting the ceiling and then rewriting it them from scratch or something.
Pretty cool. All right. Which applications do you see for it that might not be super obvious? Like, of course, if you want to create a Notion alternative. Yeah, but in which other cases do you think people websites, applications could be using something like that, and they're not yet.
Yeah, so I mean, I can't think of a lot of great ideas of something that would be unusual to use it for per se, but maybe people are creating their own editor for a blog post or notes or something like that. Maybe comments for a website, blog post comments or something like that. But really, any kind of instance where somebody wants to add a rich text editor, maybe it's a social media app. Well, maybe a social media app is probably too maybe not the right fit, because social media posts are generally limited in the kind of richness that you can provide, right? But really anywhere that you can use an editor, it's a great use case because of the customization that you can provide on top of it. So being able to craft it and add the custom commands to whatever your use cases are, there's a lot of potential opportunity there.
So basically, like any markdown editor could be technically a really good place in which you would consider replacing for it.
For sure, especially because you can write in Markdown. So if you prefer to write in Markdown, you have it there. But then you still get those the additional extensions in order to kind of provide different experiences. Or if you have different users who want to write in different ways, you have the ability to provide that with the best of both worlds.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'd like to bring the conversation a bit towards the UX of it, and a little less about the technical details of the library itself, because I think that we are, as an industry, starting to gravitate more towards the editing experience and the view experience being the same. We even got used to edit in place functionalities, which is basically like the text is there. It's technically not editable, but then if you double click on it, then it becomes an input that you can edit, and you just edit in place. So there are a lot of UXs that are getting more used more familiar to people worldwide, whereas a few years back, you had a clear distinction between the time in which you're visualizing and the time in which you're editing something. And there were clearly different pages for each aspect. So right now you're editing, right now you're visualizing. What do you think about that UX in general? When do you think that this makes sense? Do you think this is what we should aim for all cases, or no, there are still cases where having a specific edit mode makes sense?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. And I think it is really contextual to the particular use case. Thinking of like a Google Docs, for instance, that is always editable. I think, perceptually, a Google document is a working document, right? So you go in there in order to write. So of course you can see it, but you can, the whole point is to interact with it and work through it. So having that kind of click into interactivity is just kind of native feeling. I guess if you consider that as that distinction, I do think that some applications that I've seen have gone kind of too far on that. And I can't think of any off the top of my head, but, information that's intended to be presentational, that it's sometimes hard to determine when it is in edit versus presentational mode. That can create issues in itself, where you might accidentally do something and not realizing that you just saved a huge, edit to something that's important. So I think having that barrier is definitely important in some contexts. But I think really having that initial perception of whether this is a working kind of like a quote working document, as opposed to something that is presentational, making sure that you do have those, the visual indicators that you are in edit mode versus presentation mode. As far as like the edit in place, I think I usually prefer that more for forms as opposed to like a huge document. I could see its benefits, but I think intuitively, I think it works a little bit better for forms than it does for a big document. But that's just my 2 cents.
Makes sense. Chris, Peter, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'm definitely in the same camp. There's actually a very old, I'll say, legacy application we use for work where you don't want to edit, but just one false double click or extra click and it jumps,
Oh man.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely there. It's like you said, basically it all comes down to context. And I mean, that's our job, right? As front end engineers, to make it clear or easy to get that feeling when you're in edit mode and when not.
for sure, and not too easy that you don't notice it's in it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes sense. All right, cool. So basically, we already stipulated when you can consider this library, what this library is capable of doing, the environment in which it runs. What are we missing, Kobe? Because I'm pretty sure there are other interesting things about this library that maybe we haven't asked.
I think part of the beauty of it is within its simplicity. Like there's a lot of things that you can do with it out of the box, and of course there's a lot of customizations. But at its core, like I think what it comes with and its ability to relatively simply interact with an AI tool, like an endpoint, like we were talking about. I think the simplicity is kind of what makes it shine. So I think that's kind of the hero of the story, in my opinion.
Pretty cool. Pretty cool. How is the integration of this library with other form controllers in React? Because at the end of the day, this is an input, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just receiving and outputting a markdown string. So it looks super fancy. It looks like there are a lot of things in it, but it's actually just a string. And I even wonder, like, if it exposes utilities for you to extract assets from it, because you can, for example, import videos or images in the middle of it, and maybe because if you just export the markdown, it's only going to be a link to the image, right? But maybe you want to somehow parse the string so that it generates an array of the images, an array of the code blocks, whatever. Like maybe you want to extract the intelligence tokenized version of the content in order to present it somewhere else. How easy is it to do this with this library? And does the library exposes utilities for it, or would we just rely on other libraries that interact with Markdown?
Yeah, it's interesting. I haven't actually tried out images with it yet, and that's a good question of how it would handle that, because I could see kind of two routes with that. One being that it provides a direct hook to upload in line, so maybe you add the image and then it uploads it in place, as opposed to maybe it shows like the the data, just the raw image in memory until maybe you extract the markdown or JSON version of it and then upload it prior to submitting it to a form or something like that. So that's a good question. I'm not sure how it handles images directly, but it does provide the utilities to extract the content in whatever form you want. So I know at least HTML and JSON, and then you can basically input that back. So the example that I was using when I was working on it is I was storing the HTML inside of a database, and then I would retrieve that content from the database and then inject it into the editor instance to provide the existing content inside of there. But there is an interesting question that you were going on there about kind of how it sits along with other inputs. And I don't know if it actually is a typical HTML input. I don't think you can grab the content the same way that you would from a standard input, because you kind of have to save it into state in order to grab that content. Where then if you're going to submit a form, you grab that content from the state along with the other inputs. But then you also have to consider the UX of the inputs along with that one. So, natively the inputs aren't going to look like the novel editor, right? So do you want to make your inputs look like the novel editor, or do you want your editor to look like your standard inputs? So really trying to piece those together to make sure that it looks cohesive is also important.
Okay, that's cool. In a way, I think maybe we can even start wrapping up, because the library itself, as you said, is pretty straightforward, which is good. I like it when it's that way. It's sometimes you think, oh, cool, there's a lot of content to make about X, Y, and Z, but maybe it's just because X, Y, and Z is too complicated. And in this case, it's pretty straightforward, which is very good.
Yeah, and I think like out of the box, it comes with so many features that probably for most people's use cases, like that will be sufficient. But it does come with the ability to create custom commands and customizations in order to kind of get to the use case that you need. But it is very rich out of the box, which is awesome.
I think I only have one last question, which is how much can I customize the visuals? Because I can see from the docs that they appear to be very open for you to change how it's presented. But at the same time, it's such a visual library that I would imagine that there might be things that are not customizable.
Yeah, and that's a good question. I remember trying to mess with the styles myself, and it can become complicated because if you think about all the different pieces that need to be in place in order to support something like that, so it's not only just, does the text input have a shadow or a border or something? You have to consider all the command options. You have to consider how it's indented into the side of it. It's not just simple padding or something like that. It's the UI that actually creates that interface. The UI that creates the interface, that kind of just saying the same thing. The code that creates that UI is complex. So, being able to make sure that you're targeting the right styles and you're doing it in a way that's not going to conflict with some kind of state that you might not have thought about can be challenging. But, it is important to be able to provide the ability to customize it to whatever your application look and feel is, because kind of just dropping in a completely different style doesn't always work, especially if you're, I guess, if you're doing a flat design, and this one is very, well, I guess it's not super, it has like the drop shadows and stuff, but the design is that it can be very different from some other use cases.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I think that's a good enough middle ground, right? It's like they are already giving so much for free. You can always just go straight to the source code if you really want to customize it to a whole new level.
For sure.
All right, cool. That's pretty cool, man. I think that at least for me, I'm good with starting to wrap up. Chris, Peter, do you guys have any other questions?
Nope, I don't. I think this. I think all was answered well. Yeah.
All right, okay, pretty cool. So let's just do a quick round of promos before we close things up. So to me, I'm just gonna promote the two companies that produce the show that are allowing us to be here. So Top End Devs produces a lot of other podcasts. This podcast belongs to Top End Devs, actually. So there are other shows as well. There's a show about Angular development, which I'm actually the host as well. So you might be interested in that. There are shows about DevOps, freelancing. There's a lot of stuff. So if you're a developer that wants to learn other topics besides React, definitely check out Top End Devs and the other podcasts that they have. And again, if you are at a company in which they're looking to augment their staff, or you are at a company where they want to outsource some project, I would definitely recommend checking out Unvoid. Is unvoid.com. The business model is very client friendly and very different than what other agencies typically offer for their clients. So recommend checking out those things. So those are going to be my promotions for today. Chris, how about you?
Yeah, I have another related. I've gone far deep in the rabbit hole of this idea of declarative video. So you write some code, or at least repeatable steps, and you get a video out. So there's another one, code.movie. I think this one is much more focused on, if you've ever seen those neat presentations where you have some nice lines of code slide in and animate. That's this code.movie is a bit more for that, but still working on it. And I was actually talking to one of the guests we had, Dmitry Kovalenko, a few days ago. I'm working with him a little bit on his FF frames, which is it's a Rust-based framework, but maybe I'll drop that to the link to his project. So still exploring this space.
That is so cool, dude. Like the code.movie. Oh man, when I used to do YouTube videos, it would take me an eternity because I literally had a full-time videographer editing the animations on After Effects. And it's like every single line of code would be an individual token. And it was such a pain in the ass, honestly. It was the thing that he was always like, Lucas, let's record more videos. Let's do anything else. Like, dude, I can't take animating another line of code. It was the most tedious part of the work. And this just turns it into something automatic. I always wanted to have something like this. That's Pretty cool, man. And how does it, like, can I directly export this as an AVI, which would be like a video format that already has opacity, so I don't have to necessarily use the card in the background, or does it only expose it as code itself, as front end code?
I'm not sure. I think I almost cringe a bit to say. I think you can get a GIF, but then I mean, if they're making GIFs, there must be some intermediate. You can for sure do. There's some sort of JSON import export as always, but yeah, that's why I went down this. I'm looking at this whole space because it's the same for me. Like whenever you record anything with talking and coding, there's always so much time to edit those videos. It's crazy. So any way that you can do that in a repeatable fashion saves a lot of time. So
Yeah, this is super cool.
How about you, Peter?
Yeah, so I'll just paste my course or project on web components. Yeah. So I just did educative, which just does a little project with web components and all. Yeah. So that's just
Okay, cool. I'll be sending all those links here on the comment section. And Kobe, the star of today's episode. How about you?
Yeah, I actually have an upcoming course as well. It's a full stack Next.js 15 course, going through authentication with Clerk, database management with Zata and Drizzle ORM, adding some payment options with Stripe, and just learning all the new APIs with React 19. So if you check it out, spacejelly.dev/next.js, post the link in the chat as well. You can get updates and exclusive access when I'm ready to launch it.
Pretty sweet. I sent it on the comment section. So if you're listening to us on YouTube, LinkedIn, what's the other platform that used to be for gamers that do live stream, and I always forget the name? Twitch. Exactly. Twitch. Then you're gonna have a comment section there, and you can see the links of everything that we mentioned. All right, man. Pretty cool. Colby, again, thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it was really cool. Feel free to reach out to me, and we can do another round anytime. Thank you.
Sounds great.
All right. And for you that stick up until the end, thank you for your time, and I will see you in the next one.